When Deep Purple reunited in 1984, it felt like the impossible had happened. Perfect Strangers wasn't just a successful comeback. It was one of the greatest reunion albums in rock history. Fans embraced the return of the classic Mark II lineup. Critics praised the record, and the accompanying tour proved the chemistry was still there. So how did the follow-up become the album that nearly destroyed the band? Behind The House of the Blue Light was a recording process filled with arguments, creative disagreements, petty feuds, and one of the most ridiculous stories in rock history involving a plate of spaghetti. By the time the tour was over, the relationships within Deep Purple had deteriorated so badly that the classic lineup was on borrowed time. Let's take a look at one of the most turbulent chapters in Deep Purple's history. After the enormous success of Perfect Strangers, expectations couldn't have been higher. Unfortunately, creating the follow-up turned into what those close to the band described as like pulling teeth. One of the biggest problems was that Deep Purple tried too hard to sound modern. The mid-1980s were dominated by polished production, digital recording, and synthesizer-heavy rock albums. Instead of simply making another classic Deep Purple record, the band consciously tried to adapt to contemporary trends. Years later, Jon Lord admitted that this had been a major mistake. He felt the band had lost sight of what fans actually wanted. People didn't want Deep Purple chasing the latest production techniques. They wanted Deep Purple sounding like Deep Purple. The polished, glossy production became one of the album's defining characteristics, but it also divided both the band and their audience. The problems went much deeper than production choices. For years, Deep Purple had followed an unusual songwriting arrangement. Every member received equal songwriting credit regardless of who contributed the most to an individual song. It encouraged collaboration and helped avoid internal competition. Ritchie Blackmore wanted to change that. From the beginning of the reunion, he insisted that royalties should be divided according to who actually wrote each part of the song. Former tour manager Colin Hart later joked that the proposal was received about as welcome as a fart in the spacesuit. What had once been a collective creative process suddenly became much more individual. Instead of working together, members became increasingly protective of their own contributions. Roger Glover hoped to solve the band's problems by changing the recording environment. Rather than working in a traditional studio, he rented the Playhouse, a remote theater in Stowe, Vermont, along with a mobile recording unit. His hope was that isolation would inspire creativity. Instead, it highlighted the growing divisions. Ian Gillan and Roger Glover spent most of the time tucked away in one corner trying to write songs. Blackmore largely kept to himself. Meanwhile, Jon Lord and Ian Paice often found themselves acting as neutral observers, trying to avoid the growing tension. The songwriting simply wasn't flowing naturally. Large portions of the album had to be scrapped and re-recorded because the band wasn't satisfied with the results. Instead of moving forward, they constantly found themselves revisiting material they had already completed. Even individual songs became battlegrounds. Mitzi Dupree began as an informal jam between Gillan and Glover, who both loved the track. Blackmore and several others hated it. Rather than recording a polished studio version, the band ultimately used the original jam recording because they couldn't agree on redoing it.
3 or 4 times more than Singapore. She may not.
Gillan himself wasn't completely happy with the finished album either. In an interview around the album's release, he even described Dead or Alive as a pile of shit. By the time recording wrapped, sessions had left lasting scars. Those tensions would soon spill over onto the road. Released in January 1987, The House of the Blue Light actually performed well commercially despite all the behind-the-scenes problems. The album reached number 10 in the United Kingdom and number 34 on the Billboard 200 in the United States. Although it wasn't the blockbuster that Perfect Strangers had been, it was far from a commercial failure. Its biggest success came on rock radio. The lead single, Bad Attitude, featured Jon Lord's powerful Hammond organ, one of Ritchie Blackmore's strongest riffs of the era, and a confident vocal performance from Ian Gillan. The song climbed to number 14 on Billboard's mainstream rock chart and remains one of the most respected tracks from Deep Purple's late 1980s catalog. The second single, Call the Wild, continued the album's more polished melodic direction.
Operator, you got to keep me
accompanied by a very 1980s MTV-style music video. The song also reached number 14 on the mainstream rock chart, although it only managed number 92 on the UK singles chart. Ironically, both singles found success in exactly the style that several members later regretted pursuing. The album also included memorable tracks like The Spanish Archer, The Unwritten Law, and Mad Dog, each showcasing the incredible musicianship that still existed despite the growing personal conflicts. Increasingly, the biggest chart success connected to the era wasn't actually from the House of the Blue Light. In 1988, while promoting the live album Nobody's Perfect, the band released a brand new recording of their 1968 classic Hush to celebrate Deep Purple's 20th anniversary.
So deep, clean in, one can see.
The new version actually charted higher in the UK than either of the album's studio singles.
They had a showdown with spaghetti.
If there's one story that perfectly summarizes the relationship between Ian Gillan and Ritchie Blackmore during this period, it's what fans now call the Spaghetti Incident. Unlike the Guns N' Roses album of the same name years later, Deep Purple's version involved actual spaghetti.
It was in Cleveland. Jim had picked up my food from catering, and Ian had gone, "Who's that for?"
According to former manager Colin Hart, tensions were already at a boiling point during the House of the Blue Light tour. One version of the story says the band was eating dinner before when Blackmore became irritated by Gillan's loud personality. Losing his patience, Blackmore picked up a plate of spaghetti and dumped it all over Gillan's head.
And with that, I saw John Law go, and they all parted. It was
Gillan's response made things even worse. Instead of yelling or fighting back, he calmly wiped 2 eye holes through the pasta on his face and continued his conversation as though nothing had happened. Blackmore stormed out, even angrier than before. Another version, later told by Blackmore himself, paints an even stranger picture. According to Blackmore, someone had delivered him a plate of spaghetti that had been completely covered in ketchup.
well, it's Rich's food. He said, "Let me add some ketchup to it." And of course, he put ketchup all over it.
Already convinced Gillan was constantly playing practical jokes on him, Blackmore assumed Gillan was responsible. Without checking the facts, he grabbed the plate, marched into Gillan's dressing room, demanded to know if he had done it, and immediately shoved the ketchup-covered spaghetti directly into Gillan's face like a comedy pile. The twist.
I just turned away and said, "I don't want to hit you, Ritchie."
Gillan insisted he had absolutely nothing to do with the food. Years later, Blackmore admitted that Gillan had actually been innocent all along and that he had simply lost his temper. It was a bizarre moment, but it perfectly illustrated how little trust remained between the two men.
The band's next door. Okay.
Thanks.
See you later.
See what I tell you. I told you he wouldn't let you down.
If the recording sessions were difficult, the tour was even worse. The House of the Blue Light tour quickly became one of the most toxic periods in Deep Purple's history. The band had essentially split into separate camps. Blackmore isolated himself from the rest of the group, while Gillan, Roger Glover, John Lord, and Ian Paice largely operated together. The atmosphere backstage became so tense that the members often resorted to passive-aggressive jokes just to cope.
Sorry.
At Wembley Stadium in 1987, they even staged a fake backstage fight for members of the press, poking fun at their increasingly deserved reputation for internal conflict.
Who? I can't hear you. Too much noise. Sorry, I'm busy.
Fortunately, the problems didn't stay backstage. Blackmore frequently appeared disengaged during concerts, sometimes refusing to play certain solos or deliberately disrupting the flow of performances. The lowest point came during the Wembley show. So frustrated was Blackmore that he refused to return for the encore. The remaining members walked back onto the stage without him and performed Smoke on the Water with John Lord using his heavily distorted Hammond organ to cover the missing lead guitar parts. Then came the accident that effectively ended the American leg of the tour.
Guitarist Ritchie Blackmore broke a finger and he can't play.
On May 30, 1987, during an encore performed in Phoenix, Arizona, Blackmore performed one of his trademark stage moves by throwing his Fender Stratocaster high into the air. This time, things went horribly wrong. He misjudged the catch, broke a finger trying to grab the falling guitar, and suddenly found himself unable to play. The injury forced Deep Purple to cancel the remainder of what's supposed to be a highly profitable North American tour. Even the set list reflected the band's dissatisfaction with the new album. Call a While, despite being a single, disappeared after only 6 performances. Instead, the band relied heavily on older Mark II classics and songs from Perfect Strangers. They even added Rainbow's instrumental Difficult to Cure, giving Blackmore an opportunity to step into his own musical world. The only real positive to emerge from the final stretch of the tour was the 1988 live album Nobody's Perfect. Its title proved unintentionally fitting. It captured a band that could still produce incredible performances on stage, even as if they barely could tolerate being in the same room together. Looking back, The House of the Blue Light remains one of Deep Purple's most underrated albums. Despite the polished production and internal disagreements, it contains excellent songs and showcases 5 world-class musicians still capable of creating compelling music. But it also marked the beginning of the end for the reunited Mark II lineup. Arguments over songwriting, the failed recording sessions, and everything else, it all pointed toward a band whose personal relationships were rapidly falling apart. Next episode, we're going to see the consequences. One member of this classic lineup is going to be out the door, and his replacement would shock fans around the world and take Deep Purple in an unexpected new direction. Who was chosen to step into one of rock's most iconic frontman roles, we'll find out next time. But before that, I'm circling back to Whitesnake because they're going to release their biggest album, which is the self-titled, or also called 1987. This is the big metal album that had all the hits, where I actually discovered Whitesnake myself, and then I kind of went looking at their back catalog. But that will be the next episode, which I'll make that in a few days. So, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.